So I'm with the dazzling, the beautiful, charming,
Uh-huh.
the incomparable, the inimitable,
All right.
the sexy.
Oh, okay.
Maven, doyen of African fashion.
Wow.
Zam Nkosi. Welcome.
Hey, how's it?
I'm great, how are you?
Cool.
And I'm not saying a precedent for other interviews to ensure you.
No, only you, my love.
I wasn't gonna have a problem.
No, you're the only one.
Okay, good.
You're the one and only.
That's what I'm talking about. I love to hear. So 25 years,
Yeah.
quarter century. That's a long time. That's a long time to do anything, let alone build, establish, grow a business. When you consider also that many businesses don't make it out of the first 2 years.
Yeah.
How challenging was that exercise? How difficult or hard really was it
Mm.
to do?
Yeah, I think any entrepreneurial journey is hard. Um, Even when you have a lot of successes and feats, there's a lot of hardship along the way. So, yeah, when I reflect, I mean, I often say that if I knew back then what I know now, I may never have done it.
Yeah.
Because it was really uncharted territory. I It was something I knew nothing about. I just had a burning passion to create something that would basically be an expression of what it means to be African in the 21st century. I'd always been very passionate about issues around identity. And South Africa was at a very interesting stage, you know, post our first democratic elections. There was just a sense of renewed energy, a renewed sense of self, a yearning for the establishment of a new identity as South Africans. And so the environment was rife for a brand, an undertaking that would be an expression of all of that and a reflection of all that was happening at the time. So I had that passion. That was the passion. But I knew nothing about fashion and did it anyway and just decided one would figure things out along the way.
Kind of build it mid-flight, as it were.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've often said this to you as well, is that there's a measure of naivety necessary for most entrepreneurs, to your point about, you know, knowing now, in retrospect or hindsight, what would be involved, how fraught the journey would be with challenges and so on. What would you say if you could travel back in time to a young, wide-eyed, and impressionable Nkhensani? What advice would you give her? What would you change, if anything? So essentially, what would you tell her?
Interesting one. Yeah. I would say, really, today, what I know is, or should be the foundation for anything you do, is your faith. And back then, I suppose there was a lot of spiritual naivety. And so that foundation didn't exist to the same extent as it does now. So I think there's so much more that I could have been able to cope with and handle better had I had that spiritual foundation, which right now is the basis for everything I do in my entire life. And something I'm so grateful for to have found, because some people go up their entire lives without finding that place. And for me, it's a sacred place, it's a sacred space. And I really want everything that I do from now on to flow from there. So the timing was really perfect. And I think Stoned Cherrie has gone through a metamorphosis. And there was a time when we were really out there at sea, really trying to find our feet again, find our way back to shore. So I'm grateful that it's happening at a time where I'm rooted in my faith. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
So I think before we actually get into the brass tacks of the interview, the elephant in the room that we need to address, I think the burning question that perhaps many of your fans, followers, customers, supporters are seeking an answer to is, where have you been for the last few years? Because it seemed for a time that you had disappeared off the fashion radar. Where have you been, and what have you been up to?
Um, well, as a business, like I said, we went through a metamorphosis, and I like to describe it as a time where, there's so much change um, in the country, on the global fashion scene, on the local fashion scene throughout the ages. Um, so much happened. We've been through pandemics. There's so much that's happening in the world. And all of those things always impact economies. And fashion is no exception. So locally, I think how the landscape has changed is that we've had an influx of international brands. We've had an influx of cheap imports. Um, and it's very hard. There came a time where it was very hard, because remember, we started off, we had a store. So very early in our establishment as a business, we were in retail, learning that whole monster and how it works. And then we had the privilege of being stocked by national distributors, Woolworths and Foschini. And that was university. I mean, we really learned so much through that engagement with our customers, and a very commercial model and a very rigorous environment. But I think, like I said, a lot changed because all of these things happened economically, influx of cheap imports. And at a time, when one was looking at the landscape, it became very clear that it was hard to compete as a local fashion brand with all of these things happening. Firstly, with your retailers, who ultimately, even if they're going to give you a space in their environments, it's self-interest. It's positioning, it's marketing. It's never really to grow you into a substantial business. Your competition otherwise, in that instance. So looking at all of those things, it became very clear that some of the things that we very naively thought that we could do when we first started were not as easy to do. And I also knew that we had spent 10, 15 years in retail doing that. And I knew that in order to grow, one would either have to set up one's own distribution, nationally, which would come with its own set of risks and challenges, and not necessarily what I wanted to do. Also, at the same time, juggling that and being a mom, because throughout my foray into fashion and entrepreneurship, I was having kids. And today I have children. We have children. One who is 23, who's now off into the working world as a CA. The other one in second university, and the last one in matric.
The first one.
Yeah, the other first one, our first one, my sister's, she gifted, my sister's gift to us.
100%.
Yeah. But so there's a lot of juggling all of that. You asked earlier on, was it difficult? Absolutely difficult. Sometimes I had kids in the store, breastfeeding them there, dealing with customers. A lot. There was a lot. And I think I really got very burnt out. We also, in South Africa, could do better with mentoring one another. I didn't have examples of people who had walked my path as a woman, as a mother, who had built businesses like that. I didn't have those examples. Not to say they didn't exist and that people weren't doing those things successfully, but certainly there weren't enough opportunities to engage with people who had walked that path, who could lend a helping hand, who could, So I got burnt out. And I remember once being doing a fashion show in Paris. And I was walking through Galerie Lafayette, and I was meant to be really thrilled that I was in Paris, and here were all these clothes and opportunity. And I just remember just being like, okay. And that worried me. I thought, I'm having an
I'm
existential
becoming jaded.
crisis. Why am I not excited?
Mm.
And at the time, we had left retail after doing it for over 10 years and had opened a studio, which we, renovated an old house and created the studio, and we're creating bespoke garments out of there, and had a lot of corporate clients, did a lot of collaborations with brands, the Volvos, Audis, Nokia, just so many brands, Nando's, that we were doing things with. So times were exciting, and we really had positioned ourselves as an ingredient brand. So brands could associate with our brand and communicate something about themselves.
100%.
And, at the time, I remember thinking, do I really just still want to be in fashion? And I could see on the landscape that there's this, like I said, this influx of cheap imports. It's becoming more and more difficult to compete with cheap labor, offshore cheap labor. There's a culture of fast fashion coming in. People are, and you can see it today. Today, it's right there. You have Demu, you have all these brands. It's so easy, and they've monopolized, and they've perfected this quick to door model, and people are buying into it. That's so. Yeah, at the time I thought, do I really want to be in fashion? Because when I started, I really knew that the brand fashion was really a powerful medium, but the brand was not necessarily about fashion. It was about identity. It was about a culture. It was about representing propagators of culture and being this interface between tradition and boundless opportunity and infinite possibility. So I guess that was a time to pivot. And then what happened was, came back to South Africa, and some really boisterous agent came knocking on our door the one day, and she said, I was showing somebody the house next door and they want to buy your house. I said, well, this house is not on the market. And she said, well, here's the offer. And that was a perfect opportunity. We were like, so, okay, we didn't quite call her that, but
to the best of my recollection anyway.
Yeah, that would have been controversial. Yeah, I probably thought it. But anyway, and that was the perfect opportunity to take a step back, because, we sold the property, made a nice profit, and that was an opportunity to just take a sabbatical and try and figure out. So, like I said, that thing that I described, that we were basically, at sea, but we had to take a moment to figure out how to get back to shore.
Okay. So I want to double click on something you said earlier, which alluded to the need for balance, because you said you were playing dual roles. You were the founder CEO of a very successful fashion brand that kind of then pivoted to become a, broadly speaking, lifestyle luxury brand, whilst raising a family, whilst being a wife, and all these things. And in fact, this harks back to a conversation I had a couple of days ago with a mate of mine who's like a high-flying executive, and we're having this debate about whether or not this work-life balance is a real thing. I think it's like a notional fallacy. I think there's a tendency to think it is possible, in the same way you think that if you kind of sleep until 3 a.m. Or sleep at 3 a.m. every day, you can catch up on your sleep on the weekends, which doesn't ever happen, right? So is there such a thing as balance, or is it more really a function of presence? By that I mean, in the limited time that you do actually have with the people that you care about, that you are fully present, and it's not a question of time chronology, how many minutes you're actually spending versus the presence, the memories that you're creating in the time that you actually spend with those people. Is work-life balance a real thing, or is it really more a function of presence?
I would say it is a function of presence. I mean, when we talk about work-life balance, I always imagine it to be this thing where it's like, I'm working, and now I'm a mom,
Juggling.
and now I'm a mom, now I'm a wife, and you're juggling, and it just looks seamless. There's no such. Because different things call for your attention and time at different times. Like sometimes you can't predict. You can't always put it into very neat.
Compartmentalize it.
Absolutely. And some people are better than others. We often talk about how our son is able to compartmentalize his life and actually is very balanced. He knows how to. There's time for studying, time for work, time for exercise, time for friends, time for my
church.
Spiritual growth, and it's amazing. But I do think there is intentionality that is important.
Absolutely.
In doing that. You have to be intentional, which speaks to what you're saying, that it is about presence. And our kids taught us that. And I remember Masingita used to be the one who, if she was saying something to you and you weren't concentrating, she'd say, you're not listening. And then if you were in a rush because you've got fashion week and you've got an interview and you're trying to give her a kiss and she'd stop you, she wants the perfect kiss, and no, your lips must touch my lips. And you're thinking, child, I gotta go.
I'm running late. Don't have time for this right now.
But she forced you to be in the moment. And yeah, those are some of the lessons at the time. You didn't know you were learning lessons
100%.
about being present and being in the moment. But yeah, I know that it was very important for us to bring up our kids and not outsource it. And I really don't know how I could have done it any differently without taking a step. It's very unconventional. You don't take breaks in business. But when you have a medium-sized business, you're more malleable, and it was important to be able to kind of change pace a little bit, because your kids it only happens once.
100%. And it's almost counterintuitive to kind of take that break when you're on a winning wicket, when you've got momentum on your side and you are high achieving at the peak, you're the talk of the town. It almost feels like it's an unmanageable risk.
Yeah.
Out of sight, out of mind, as it were. That if you stop doing that and you kind of tamper with the momentum of the business, of the brand and the equity that it's garnering for itself, you run the risk of being forgotten by the marketplace and being replaced by new up-and-coming entrants into the market.
Right.
So there's a measure of risk there also.
Yeah.
But whatever it is that you're deferring that dream for obviously needs to be more compelling.
It's got to be worth it. And it was worth it.
No, without a doubt.
Yeah, it was worth it.
Without a doubt.
Having well-adjusted, kind, thoughtful, mature,
Morally conscious.
loving, just
all around
great kids. It was worth, every minute away from the limelight or whatever it's called.
Let's talk about pivotal moments that I think most entrepreneurs can speak about. There's a time when there's like a tectonic or seismic shift that happens in your career. It's like 1 minute you're kind of bobbing along like a buoy in the water, and then the next, literally turn of a dime, you are on a different trajectory. You've got new momentum, you've got velocity, things are happening. Thinking back, what was that kind of pivotal moment for you on your path to greatness with Stoned Cherrie?
So, that's a hard one to answer because there were so many. There were so many moments like that.
So let's just touch on a couple.
Going to see Lucilla Boysen, for instance, right at the beginning.
Fashion Week.
Yes. And I don't even know where I knew her from. I just knew she was the person and we're going to do Fashion Week. Because you're just naive, you're just doing whatever.
Don't know what you don't know.
You're just going for it. And she was amazing. because I didn't really have credentials. Um, but there I was, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, passionate, and she was like, absolutely. And not only did she say absolutely, she gave us the platform, and a big platform. And she said, go for it. We didn't have anything to show for it. It's not like we said, we won't disappoint. We've done ABC, and here you can take a
These are
look.
credentials.
There was none of that. She just thought, she just believed me, and she was like, go for it. And she gave us the platform. And that started us off, because then we were in the press, we had a fantastic show, and that was the beginning of everything. Signing the lease for the Zone in Rosebank. I mean, like I said,
Big
didn't
moment.
really big moment. Didn't know what I was doing. Didn't know, just did it. So people who gave us those opportunities, getting into mainstream retail, Woolworths, Foschini, and they hadn't done it. We were the first set of designers. They had never taken that kind of risk before, but they thought, you have access to a market we want to access the way you've accessed them. And that was a very affirming development. New York Fashion Week, Bryant Park, having Grace Jones open our show, having Alec Weck close our show, and feeling like, wow, this is such fun.
We didn't suggest.
We didn't suggest. So there are many moments like that. Collaborations with fantastic brands. Opening the opening ceremony for the World Cup. Just so much.
Many milestone moments.
Yeah, many. Speaking in New York at the gala dinner for Endeavor, alongside Jerry Yang, Ralph Lauren, having them there in the audience, listening to me talk and represent. Oh, thank you, my darling. Representing South Africa, just great things.
Let's talk about the challenges, the risks, and the fear of being first. Being seminal at anything is challenging because you have this vision, and depending on the degree to which you're able to articulate that vision and get buy-in, it's difficult to get everyone on side, right? Like you went to Lucilla and you explained what you're trying to achieve and so on. And obviously you've got great, oratorial and skills in terms of your ability to articulate yourself. But how easy or difficult was it to get everybody on side, because you're creating or proposing to create something that has no precedent, that people can't look to some kind of frame of reference and say, oh, so you're trying to do that. It's a new thing. It's never been done before. How difficult was it to get everybody to enroll?
I think, like I said before, the environment, there was something in the air. That post 1994 period.
The honeymoon period.
That honeymoon period where things were alive with possibility. And there was just a sense that something new was about to happen, or something new was happening. So I think a lot of people were a lot more open to new things. But, at the same time, you're always going to get systemic resistance, prejudice. It may not show, but it's there. That's a South African experience.
It's palpable.
It's a South African experience.
Absolutely.
There's no, till today,
Absolutely.
there's systemic things that exist because they were established decades ago. And on the surface, things may look like they're transformed. But bubbling under is a whole lot of stuff we haven't dealt with. So, for instance, Sonia was the only white designer we had. I remember going to design school, going to present to some students. We're looking for designers to do the following, to be part of this new movement. And, you know, all the black designers were like, I'm in. And she was the only white designer who was like, me too. I want to be part of this expression of African identity. So she was fantastic, and she
But
joined.
she was the exception because of her backstory, right?
Yes.
She wasn't like archetypally, quintessentially white South African coming out of this environment.
Right.
Which I think is probably the one thing that kind of exceptioned her out.
Yeah,
right?
made her interested. She was Namibian.
Yeah.
But Afrikaans.
At the same time.
Yeah, at the same time. So very South African at the same time. But her parents, she grew up in Namibia. But Sonia, very tall, people would come, you know, suppliers would come, we'd be in meetings together. Or they'd come into the store and see Sonia there, and immediately they'd talk to her and not
the presumption
me.
being that she's the boss.
Absolutely. And she would very quickly say, well, you'd have to address that to my boss. And so there were so many occasions like that where you realized, oh, wait a minute, we might be in this honeymoon period, but we're still in South Africa. Absolutely. And we still have some real issues.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think it does come with difficulty being first. And I think in a previous conversation, we spoke about how convention often wins the day. And when you are unconventional or you do things differently, it doesn't necessarily always translate into immediate success.
Commercial success, for that matter.
Commercial success or being recognized. Even being recognized.
We kind of love celebrating people posthumously, you know. When you pass, then everybody celebrates you, they laud your achievements, and they have great things to say about you. But when you are kind of beating a new path as a new vanguard, as it were, then nobody wants to pick a side. Nobody wants to invest, you know, lest they are wrong. Because we have this unfortunate affliction, I think as South Africans in particular, of a fear of failure and vilification of those that fail, which then has the tendency of discouraging new entrants from actually trying anything, lest they should fail, lest they should get publicly flogged. You know what I mean?
I mean, and it is an affliction, to be honest. I'm often very shocked when I see articles where they say, this actress now living in a shack. I'm like, why is that something?
Why are we celebrating then?
Why is that something we need to publicize or celebrate or put up? Like, people go through difficulties. You know what I mean? It's such a bad habit.
It is.
It's a bad habit and a lack of leadership. I think
lack of leadership, and I think a lack of
empathy.
Lack of compassion, lack of self-worth. Really, it seems like that notion that misery loves company. You know, because you don't see that with high-achieving individuals. High-achieving individuals celebrate and uplift and empower and enable other high-achieving individuals because they're secure. They don't have anything to prove, and your success is not going to diminish theirs. But when we're all kind of on the base level, scrambling, trying to make something of ourselves, we often hear at the guys, people say, hey, Lono Zenzangmon. And I often say, what why is that now the thing to do? You know what I mean? Why is it prudent to do that?
Right.
And why are you not celebrating my attempts to do better?
Right. No, absolutely. I think, I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Next.
No. It's fine.
Sorry.
Okay, let's have a quick chat about the role of fashion in informing and driving a national identity, because you said that's ostensibly the reason why you established the brand, right? And this morning we were even having a bit of a chuckle about or again, it's sort of the counterpointing view could be that precisely in the examples that I've cited, a Goma, a Gaza, a Ukraine, fashion then takes on a whole new meaning, becomes symbolic of national identity, of the spirit of resistance, and a yearning for liberation, or these kinds of things. But in the ordinary course of life, how important is fashion really in your view?
I think you've actually answered the question, because it can be both. It can be just fabric on bags and guai-guais, or it can be a very powerful medium for self-expression, the expression of identity, of heritage, of culture. And sometimes it's important for, just like the example you cited, war-torn countries or places that have to redress a lot of trauma and have to kind of rebuild themselves. Fashion can be used as a vehicle for creating an identity. I mean, I don't mean to trivialize things, because one could say, I mean, really. But I mean, there's obviously a lot that needs to do, that a country would need to do to reestablish itself and rebuild, after having experienced trauma. But I do think it can play a role. Earlier on today, when we were chatting, you also asked me who are some of the people that have influenced me and my thinking. And the one person who really influenced my thinking is my dad, who was an incredible man and a national asset. And obviously, he recently passed, and so many people spoke glowingly about his contribution, and him having dedicated his life to shaping thinking, how we think about ourselves. And it became so clear why it was that I was inspired to create something that is about identity, because his whole life was really dedicated towards shaping identity. And there's a quote that comes from him, which says, in a world that is structured to diminish black souls, to be yourself fully and wholeheartedly is in itself an act of defiance.
Absolutely.
And I love that. Because I remember there was a time, George C. Wolfe, the Colored Museum, I used to talk about dance to the rhythm of the madness in you. It's that same thing, that be wholeheartedly yourself,
100%.
because the world is structured to crush your black soul.
100%.
So people
Black man, you're on your own.
Black man, you're on your own. So all the people who inspired me, the Hugh Masikelas of this world, the Miriam Makebes, who didn't color in the lines at a time that was so hard to be, a time that was really structured to diminish them and crush their spirits. And they were doing phenomenal things. And fashion for me is part of expression. And expression is part of identity.
Absolutely.
So in the right hands of those who are propagators of culture, of identity, of heritage, it can have a profound impact. But I mean, if we're designing nipple caps...
You were talking about fashion being a form of expression and expression being an extension of identity. And we spoke earlier about sort of a collectivized national identity. You know, the great philosopher, psychoanalyst René Girard once said, we all learn by mimesis or mimicry, which is certainly true when you observe how kids learn language, right? And in fact, how we're even teaching computers to learn. Right? But I find that extends beyond just our formative years as children. It seems as if even through social media, there is a sameness that begins to emerge on those platforms, where everyone is kind of mimicking everybody else. And there is no contrarianism, there is no maverick thinking, there's no original thinking. Everyone's doing more of the same. Everyone dresses the same because it's about group affiliation and archetypes and kind of group think in that respect. Do you think social media is by default or design beginning to kill kind of individual thought and expression? Or do you think it's just happenstance developing organically?
I mean, this is probably a conversation for another day, but I do think it's by design. It is by design.
Further
That's,
to your point about
yes.
quoting Dad, right? and
This
what he
is
was
exactly
saying.
what I was
So
about to
I
say.
want you to
That
link it
when
back
he
to
said,
that.
absolutely, when he said, in a world that is structured to diminish the black soul. So there's that. The world is structured to do that. But I think in today's terms, the world is structured to diminish the soul
Period.
in general. And yeah, that's a big problem. That is a big problem. And it's possibly not a problem that young people are thinking about because they're too busy doing that. And that's by design. A lot of what is happening is there to distract us, for us to forget who we are, to not think about why we're here, to really just be concerned about the latest trend and dance.
And to assume identities that aren't ours.
Absolutely.
Because you
And
see a lot of
social
that happening,
media has
right?
made it global.
Yes, and fashionable to do. It's very attractive.
So it keeps us in the same spot, in the same place where we are consumers. We're not inventors.
Or producers.
We're not producers. Where we don't even know that a lot of what the world has to offer, even in terms of technology, comes from a place. Comes from a place. We don't know those people, we don't celebrate those people, and there's a huge chunk of history that is being lost.
Absolutely.
And in fact, when you want to talk about those things, it's not going to trend. It's not going to trend. And that is by design. So for me, I keep pointing to leadership. Leadership is everything. When you see things fall apart, it's because there's a lack of leadership.
Well, they say the fish was from the head, right?
Yes, and I'm sorry, but our leaders let us down big time, because during that honeymoon period, we forgot to wake up the next day and go, okay, time for work now. Let's get to work.
Shoulder to the wheel.
Yes. We really needed to have created a mood board, and I'll talk in terms of mood boards because we're talking fashion.
It's relatable, yeah.
Yeah. We needed to have created a mood board for what our society looks like and what it should look like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time.
100%.
And we didn't do that. We just ticked boxes. You know, every year there's like a new thing. Okay, this is the what development plan and this and that. But those things never translate into anything tangible. And a lot of time is wasted on acquiring the latest luxury bag. That's a tragedy.
Yeah, we've been sold trinkets in exchange for true treasures, which is very unfortunate. But let's come back to the issue of leadership, right? Because that's like my focus in life. I'm a student of leadership, and I love to study use cases, anecdotes of great leaders, try and sort of codify what it is that makes them great leaders in terms of attributes, skills, abilities, endowments, talents, and so on. And what I've come to realize is that you can draw up a list, an exhaustive list of all these attributes and characteristics that we've identified in sort of preceding leaders and our forebears. But the truth of the matter is no one leader can conflate and express and master all of those attributes. But what is certainly common amongst all of them is vision. Every leader needs to have a vision.
Absolutely.
They may not have the charisma, they may not have the charm, they may not have the eloquence, they may not have the educational background. Doesn't matter. Moses had a speech impediment. Aaron had to speak on his behalf, right? But he was the one that freed the Lord's people from Pharaoh. But the fact of the matter is, there has to be a vision keeper. Even Jobs didn't write code, didn't build hardware, but he was the vision keeper. He was the guy that said, "This is where we're going. This is the land that I will show you. This is the true north." And he was the sort of invisible constitutional line of force that kept everyone honest when people wanted to veer right or left of that vision. So I find that our leaders generally lack vision. Or if they have the vision, they're unable to articulate it sufficient for us to buy in and enroll. How important is it, do you think, that that vision is absolutely crystal and that a leader has the ability to articulate and engender confidence and buy-in?
It's everything. It is everything. And that's why I spoke of the mood board, because the mood board is just a colorful, creative way to talk about a vision. Putting out a vision, creating a vision is everything. It's like you said, it's your true north. It's the thing that keeps people honest. This is where we are going. And a true leader is able to get you there and keep you on track. And I don't know what our leadership is saying about where we need to go as a society.
What is the national vision?
I don't know what the national vision is. At some point it was social cohesion.
What does that mean?
How was it communicated to people? People who are struggling with economic issues today. What do they know about social cohesion? What do they think of social cohesion? Do they think it should even be on their agenda? How has it touched their lives? So we also have to stop being intellectual about things. I mean, there's a lot to be said for intellectual input. Absolutely. And academic input, because there's a lot one can learn from, other people, others who have walked the path that you seek to walk. But there's sometimes a disconnect between that and execution. Execution is everything. And a true leader and true leadership is also about harnessing the skills of other people around you. So you may create the vision, but you also have to have people around you who can actually execute that vision.
100%. One of my favorite quotes or definitions about leadership is that a leader is somebody that channels the genius of other people.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately for us, especially within the African context, you'll see a tendency towards somebody who sees themselves as
everything,
lording over everyone else.
Yes.
And the entire system is then organized around
Right.
whatever their self-interest is.
Absolutely.
As opposed to the upside down kingdom of Christ, for instance, where the king becomes the servant, washes their feet, rides in on a borrowed donkey, has nothing but sacrifices himself for everyone.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's unfortunate that that's not the sort of constitutional line that we've taken
as a government, especially.
Because when it's electioneering time, when there's a lot of rhetoric and politicking going on,
we're washing people's feet,
whoever it is. No, exactly. We're kissing, snotty-nosed babies, and we're hugging homeless grannies and doing the whole thing. But the second I'm in power, it's everybody foots like up my way. Here comes my blue light brigade. You know what I mean? Now all of a sudden, the dynamic has shifted literally overnight.
Yeah.
So question is, how do we now raise a more conscious, well-adjusted, compassionate, empathetic, forward-thinking generation when the preceding generations have conducted themselves in this way? And harking back to the point I made earlier about my Mises, that's the example they have. That's what they're mimicking. How do we break that cycle?
We really have to have a focus on leadership and building future leaders, investing in young people that show promise, that are focused, that just show promise. Like I said, when I walked into Lucilla's office and she said, "There's something I see in that," and she backed us. We need to do a lot more of that. We need to back young people who are serious, who are not distracted, and give them a future. Give them a future, nurture them. We need to harness. There's so many amazing people that we haven't done enough of, exposing young people to these great minds. There are a lot of great people
No, there isn't a
that we
dearth of
have.
intellect or talent in this country.
Yeah, we've
Or the
got
continent, for
great
that matter.
minds on the continent.
Absolutely.
The
Absolutely.
Advocate Mujanku Gumbis of this world, the
The list
Chabani
is, the
Manganyis of
list
this
is
world, the Hugh
endless.
Masigelas
The
of this
list is
world. There are
endless.
so many great,
In every facet of life.
absolutely individuals that really should be handing over. It's almost like you could take some of their wisdom and bottle it and preserve it. And we don't even do that. I'm like, if our leadership and our government had at least said there are some gems that need to be preserved and disseminated, and that's how you build. We didn't even do that.
100%.
But maybe it's never too late. I don't know.
I suppose you've got to value something before you feel the need to preserve it. Otherwise,
Yes.
why would you do that? What's the motivation?
Yeah.
Let's come back to fashion for a moment. The global fashion industry, I think, has a market cap of around 1.79 trillion US dollars as at 2024 numbers, projected to be 1.84 trillion dollars in the 2025 financial year. And our contribution on the business end of fashion as Africans collectively is minuscule. It's probably fractions of a percent. How can we get more share of that wallet? How can we have a more meaningful participation in that market, considering that there are some brands, and they shall remain nameless because I don't want to get sued, that have essentially built and premised their entire design language on certain tribes in West Africa, for instance. You know what I mean? So a lot of these westernized brands come to Africa for quote unquote creative inspiration, which is essentially
It's
appropriation, culturally
really.
theft, on the extreme end. But they build their businesses, multi-billion-dollar market cap businesses, off the back of African creativity, ingenuity, um, innovation. How do we actually begin to play a more meaningful role in that space and take greater agency and ownership?
Well, first and foremost, I think there needs to be a shift in thinking as a start. Because maybe we have become too comfortable with being consumers and not producers. We've become too comfortable with inspiring the world. We just, like you said, we are inspiration, and we're too happy to see somebody, dancing a dance that we created in our backyard. Oh, so and so, but you get nothing from it. And instead, they grow their brands and nothing happens for you. So I think we need to first change our thinking around what do we want to be in this world.
Goes back to vision.
Goes back to vision. Because if you're not even thinking about those things, you're gonna be in that cycle forever. Because they are gatekeepers of industry, big business and big industries. It's almost impossible to, but it's not, because you do have disruptive businesses that have disrupted whole industries. You point to it a lot. Airbnb versus the hotel industry. They didn't see that coming. So it is possible, but we've got to change our thinking. We've got to stop being comfortable with the status quo. I also think that we also need to become self-reliant, because we think making it means you've made it internationally. We've got an entire continent. We've got to back ourselves. We've got to back our brands. We've got to start developing an appetite for our own homegrown brands instead of being sheep and followers. You've got to have the luxury brand. All of you must have the same bag because it positions you in a certain way. You can also be positioned in that way with something that is developed authentically through Africa and that supports Africans. And there's an entire continent. I'm now talking about the continent, not necessarily just South Africa. There's so many talented individuals, artists, musicians, writers, composers, poets,
Intellectuals,
intellectuals,
technologists.
innovators, scientists.